The next step brings us around to putting on the gear cover plate. And it's going to capture the bearing. So what you're going to want to make sure before you put it on is that that bearing is fully seated down in there. So when we bolt this on, it doesn't warp the plate. We're going to use 3 M5 by 10 screws, and they are metal to metal, so we're going to make sure that we use some Loctite on them. So we're going to go ahead and get one and get these 3 aligned. And going in. You do need to take a quick look at this front plate. There are also 2 other screw holes over here once it gets mounted up, and kind of threw me for a little loop until I really started looking at it. And what's going to happen is when you put your spur gear cover on, you're going to screw the cover on rather than use the pins, which I think is actually a pretty cool way to go. So we're going to get these 3 going, and we have our spur gear cover plate all mounted up and ready to go. Our next step is to go ahead and put our spur gear back on. And first part of that is to use the original spur gear spacer, which is going to go over the lay shaft. And then we're going to put our spur gear assembly over and go ahead and put the C-clip on. And excuse me while I get the C-clip on, it's hard to do these and work for the camera at the same time. So there we go. I'm going to put the C-clip on. And what we're going to want to do, just like we do with the gas powered, is we're going to want to check for play in the spur gear. And if there's any large amount of play, you're going to want to use the Team FastEddy shims from our Pro Series shim kit to make sure that that's all nice and tight. On this particular unit, it fit right on, and there's no additional play, so real happy about that. Make sure everything's turning freely and that there's no drag or binding in your drivetrain at this point. And now we're going to go ahead and fish out our our pinion gear and go ahead and place the pinion gear on the shaft. I do want to revisit something here real quick. The directions were pretty specific about how the motor mounted in with the wires facing forward. And what we had found is that when you mount it that way, that the wires hit up against the lateral brace and was actually going to, over time, cut and nick the wires. So we also played around with turning it around so that the wires were facing backwards, and we also had that same problem with them very tightly rubbing against this top back brace. So we went ahead and repositioned our motor for the wires to face straight up. It would be nice if they were down and out of the way. It makes it a little bit cleaner. However, this looks like it's going to be the best way with these pointing up to have it fit in properly without any chances of the wires being nicked. So let me go ahead and fish out my pinion gear, and we're going to go ahead and mount the pinion gear up. Okay, we're going to go ahead and mount the pinion gear now. For people that have run electric before, this is probably something that you're used to doing. However, for some of the gas guys, it's not. And we're going to go over this and show you how to properly install the pinion and to set your mesh. Go ahead and grab your pinion. The first thing that you're going to want to do is put some Loctite on the small set screw located here that's going to hold it to the shaft. With this being a larger pinion, if you have some green Loctite, which I suggest that you get, what you're going to do is put some of that on the shaft of the motor. And that green Loctite is actually going to help lock the pinion into place. Now the pinion itself you're going to see that there's a portion here that sticks out. That is going to go towards the outside. So we're going to go ahead and flip the pinion around like this when we slide it on. When you take a look at your motor, there's a flat portion on the shaft, which I rotated pretty much in the upright position. And what you're going to do is take your pinion and put it on, and you're going to tighten down that set screw just until it touches. You don't want it tight, but you want it just till it touches so that it captures the flat portion of that shaft. And we're going to tighten it up later. Now you're going to position the pinion from front to back on the shaft so it touches the most possible portion of your spur gear. And you want as much gear to gear as you can get. So you're going to go ahead and peek down with your head and make sure that that pinion is properly centered onto your spur gear. And at that point, we're going to go ahead and tighten it down. Just like so. So what we've done at this point is centered the pinion onto the spur so that it's properly aligned and you have as much meat, if you will, to work with there as possible. The next thing that we're going to do is to set the mesh. Go ahead, if your screws are not already loosened, go ahead and loosen up all 3 of the screws so that your motor can freely slide back and forth. So I have to loosen it up just a little bit more. And setting your mesh, believe it or not, is one of the most important parts of electric. So as you can see now, my motor will slide back and forth. Not easily, but it will. You have to wiggle it a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the distance between the gears so they're not too tight or not too loose. The best way that we have found to do this is to grab one of the plastic bags that your screw came in. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this plastic bag down, and you can rotate your gears if you need to get that plastic bag in between the spur and the pinion. At this point, you're going to reach in the back with your hand and you're going to slide the 2 gears together, and you're going to pull back on the motor with your hands, just like I'm doing here. Let me back out a little bit so you can see. I'm going to pull that in. I'm going to make sure it's nice and firm, and I'm going to hold it there. I'm going to make sure that bag is captured in between the 2 gears. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the screws to keep it in place. I'm going to make sure that you get all 3 of them properly tightened. Okay, once your once your motor is tightened down, you can go ahead and rotate the bag out just like so. At this point, you're going to want to spin like this, and you're going to look for any high spots in your spur gear, because a lot of times these spur gears aren't exactly perfectly made, and you're going to have a high spot on one. If you do run into a high spot, you're going to feel binding and you're going to feel it get real tight. At that point, you're most likely going to want to get a different spur gear and get one and make sure that it's nice and round. That way there's no binding or high spots. If there is any binding or high spots and it's just extremely minimal, what you can do is take your plastic bag and double it over and go ahead and put it in. However, that's getting a little bit little bit far out of the tolerances that we like to see for mesh. But the most important thing is that it does turn freely without binding. So that's how you set your mesh. At this point, what I would like you to do, because we skipped this step earlier, was go ahead and take out one of the engine screws. There we go. This is a motor. And we take out one of the motor screws and put Loctite on it, put it back in and tighten it down, and do one at a time, and go ahead and put Loctite on the 3 motor screws.